Hi, everybody, it's Josh with Talk About Trek, and I am again happy to be back to talk about another wonderful Star Trek book. This very evening, mere moments ago, I finished up the first part of the Q Continuum Saga by Greg Cox, and this was Q Space, as you can see. The ultimate Q adventure begins right here in my hands. Of course, this is TNG number 47. This was published in 1998, and let's just dive right into the back cover here. It's a mouthful. The unpredictable cosmic entity known only as Q has plagued Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the crew of the Starship Enterprise since their very first voyage together. But little is known of Q's mysterious past, or that of the unearthly realm from which he hails. Now Picard must learn Q's secrets, or all of reality may perish. The Q Continuum, Q Space. Ever since its discovery, the Great Galactic Barrier has impeded humanity's exploration of the universe beyond the Milky Way. Now, brilliant Federation scientists may have found a way to breach the barrier, and the Enterprise is going to put it to the test. The last thing Picard needs is a return visit from the omnipotent troublemaker, so naturally, Q appears. But Q has more in mind than his usual pranks. And while the Enterprise struggles to defeat a powerful inhuman foe, Captain Picard must embark on a fantastic odyssey into the history of the Q Continuum itself, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Nice, okay. That's a lot. It's a big back cover, but man, it really doesn't even spoil anything about it, really. So, well done. Great job on that. What else can we tell you here? Originally sold for $6.50 US, $8.50 Canadian. The Q Continuum Q Space cover, very interesting cover. I like it. I don't know. Here, let's see. We can give you guys a bigger look at it here. There we are. So as you can see, we've got Q standing over the shoulder here of Captain Picard. And then we've got this face in the background. What is this face? We don't know. Could be someone we know, maybe someone we don't know. Who knows? But anyway, the cover art here was done by Drew Blair, who's done some other work as well. And I do particularly like this one. And you can see they're in their first contact era uniforms. So I failed to do my research here, but it seemed to me like, was this the first kind of Enterprise E book? Or maybe just in the previous books they were on the E, but it wasn't really featured as much. Because I feel here in this book, the Enterprise almost feels like another one of the characters, kind of almost. So that was done particularly well. So I guess before we dive into the normal rundown of what the whole thing is, let's just give you the basic idea of what you're looking at here. First off, this is a saga. So if you're going to get into it, you're going to want to get into, you're going to want to do all three. At first, when I was reading it, I didn't know if it was going to be one of those sagas where each has its own kind of self-contained story that then builds up to the next one. This one is basically a three-part book, divided up like this. So the ending cuts off. It's a cliffhanger. You gotta read the next one to see what's going to happen. But what it does give you is a lot of very interesting Q backstory, Q history, and just a very, a cool look at this kind of other plane of existence that the Q and these other, non-corporeal life forms live on, So he does that very well in this book, and writes Q very well. And the other thing that I really particularly enjoyed about this book is how many times he would send me to the dictionary to look up a word. I think he got me 5 times in here. I don't know. With different words that I was not familiar with. So it's always nice when you get to go learn a new word, and then when that happens, several times in a book, uh, I'm always pleased with that. So I am really excited to move forward. I want to see where this is going. Especially picked up in the last 5 chapters maybe, because that's when they really kind of introduced, I think, what is to be the main villain of the whole story. So that was very interesting. I like the callback to previous Q TNG episodes, which they do in here as well, and you can tell that they are also building towards something else with this Federation scientist, this Betazoid scientist who is obsessed with breaking through the Great Barrier. And so that they spend a little bit of time on him and kind of his obsession, but the majority of the story follows Picard and Q, and all of that is really well done. And then besides that, you have just kind of some action on the bridge with the crew. So other side characters in here, you do get a little bit of Barclay getting some things done in here, and you get to meet Q's wife and Q's child. And I meant to look it up beforehand, and I'm wondering if Q's wife referenced here is the same female Q that was featured in Voyager. So I don't know. I guess I have to look a little bit further into that. I don't know. Here, that episode of Voyager was the Q and the Gray, and the Q and the Gray came out in '96. So yeah, entirely possible that the character of Q's wife is the one portrayed here in this episode. So let's just go with that. What the heck, right? So anyway, before we dive into any complete spoilers, this was a great book, a lot of fun, well written, didn't go off onto too many tangents, teaches you a lot of fun words, and sets up what I'm hoping is going to be a very interesting and very exciting, read for me. So I'm going to dive right into the next one tonight, and hopefully spend a good majority of tomorrow just really digging deep into it. That's the plan anyway. So, but if you don't want to be spoiled, you can go ahead and shut it off here and live long and prosper, and we'll see you next time. But we're going to dive into this because you won't believe the notes that I made. If you've been watching, I've been telling myself I need to make better notes. So let's just, as an example, there's my notes from the previous books I was reading, and here's the notes from the last book. But then when you look at the notes from this book, I really went to school on this thing. Look at that. I wrote a book on this book. Well, not really, but I was enjoying it, and also just enjoying the process of kind of writing my thoughts down, writing things down that I liked about it, and I don't know, I guess having the time to do that too was good. So it's going to give me a chance to tell you the story of this book in a, hopefully, a way that makes sense and actually follows the story that the author wrote. So let's dive right into it. Starts off with a prologue, a voice trapped somewhere, speaking in a very Seussian form of almost poetry, which was one of the words that I learned while reading this book. Is called doggerel, which is a kind of a form of writing that's kind of a comic or a funny type of writing, which Dr. Seuss is a style of. And I'll give you an example, and if you read the you can go back and watch the previous video where I do read the prologue in here, but just not at all is not is now, and just more and more things like that, and fear here, fair there, fear is fair, just kind of that kind of fun stuff, and I can see where that's going to continue on later on down the line. So you're going to have a good book when it starts out with a captain's log, and this book starts out with a captain's log. The Enterprise the Enterprise E has been tasked to escort Betazoid scientist Lem Fall to the Great Barrier. Lem has possibly figured out a way to poke through the Great Barrier and see what is on the other side. So the E is going to bring him over there so he can do his experiments and see what they can do. So now Lem is a little bit of a suspicious character. He is first off he has Iverson's disease, so he's actively dying, and he knows that his end is near. And it's kind of like a little bit of a jerk to everybody, but he has his reasons. It's like this is his life's work, and his life is ending. This is his one shot, his one opportunity to seize everything he ever wanted, and so he's a little upset when things aren't perfectly going his way. He barks at Barkley a little bit and kind of gives him a bit of a hard time. Poor Barkley. He's always getting the end of it, and that's no good. He has two children who he basically ignores. And I think they're, maybe 9 and 4 years old, Milo and Kenya. So their mother was lost in a transporter accident, which is kind of one of the reasons why Lemfall is maybe a little bit obsessed with trying to do what he's doing. Maybe he's trying to bring her back to life, something like that. So there's more to Lem than meets the eye. So we meet Lieutenant Leoro, who is the security guard, or the security chief aboard the Enterprise E. And then this is when we get to meet, or we bring in Q. Q comes into the story now as they approach the Great Barrier. Basically, and of course, typical Q fashion, this time he comes in dressed in like a Buckingham Palace guard affair. And basically just typical Q, not being straight, just kind of saying, turn around, go no further. So you get an interlude here where it seems that the Susian voice that's lost somewhere seems to sense Q. So again, the plot thickens a little bit. So Captain Picard is listening to some Carmen in his quarters when Q decides to pop in, this time dressed as a matador, to again try to convince Picard not to proceed with the experiment on the Great Barrier. So cut to Geordi and Data in the lounge, and this is where we get to meet the other Q. And this is Q's wife and Q's baby son. Not a baby, I'm thinking, toddler, 3 to 4 years old, possibly. So they come into the lounge and they're causing all sorts of trouble. Well, baby Q is kind of causing all sorts of trouble. This is where I got to learn another word, the lorgnette, which is what you call those little glasses on a stick that people would wear to the opera or whatever. But the other Q, Lady Q, has a lorgnette, and of course she's in a safari costume, as if she's on a safari to a barbarous culture, which is of course that's how they consider the humans there. So so basically it's kind of revealed at this point. They give you another interlude, and they give you a look inside of Lem Fall and kind of his thinking. And this was interesting here, and I wrote this down, that this was something that he, I guess, was thinking, but for him, the restrictions of mere physicality chafed at him. So he's seeking a way to, move past his physical body and go to whatever the next step of evolution would be. So and this is also again apotheosis. I didn't know that word, and that means the highest point, because basically he's reached the highest point, the culmination of the apotheosis of his career, and he's being kind of pulled back, that he needs to be able to complete this. So we go back to the officers' lounge where Q now is with Q and little Q. And I love how in the book, little Q is a lowercase q. So that was very well done. They ask what has happened to Captain Picard's favorite atavism, which is Wharf. That was another word I had to look up, but basically just a kind of a backhanded insult at Worf as being a barbarous, person. So uh, they introduce us then to a young Ensign Percy, who is the kind of like the babysitter, and he's watching over the kids there, Milo and Kinya, who are in the. I think they turned a holodeck into kind of like a kids' play center, and then Baby Q pops in. So this is kind of a little, I don't know, a little funny part in the book where they're dealing with this Baby Q who's stacking blocks all the way up to the ceiling, and he's crawling across the ceiling, and he falls down. They have to try to catch him, but do they even need to catch him? And what's going to happen? And so they call in Counselor Troy and Dr. Crusher to help, and they go in there and take care of the Q, and they're kind of wondering, why would the Q leave Baby Q in the hands of them if they consider them so inferior? But in the end, it turns out that Lady Q was just watching right along the whole time anyway, so nothing could have happened there to Baby Q. So, yeah, there we go. So we're about 7 chapters in there. They have noticed an increase in tachyon emissions coming on, so maybe something approaching. Fall is getting more impatient. Q is continuing to warn them off, but again, just not being straight with them. But when is Q ever actually straight with Picard, right? Okay. So, now, Chapter 9, the Calamarain approach. So, if you don't remember the Calamarain, they go back to the episode of TNG where the Continuum kicked Q out, took his powers away, and sent him to live on the Enterprise. And then the Calamarain were some entity, this kind of gaseous form that Q had did something to in the past. And now they had their chance to get their revenge, so they were seeking him out to, torture and kill him or whatever they needed to do. In the end of that episode, Q kind of actually proves himself by giving up his life so that the Enterprise is not destroyed. The Continuum gives him back his powers, and he does something to the Calamarain and sends him away. But now the Calamarain are back, and they've surrounded the Enterprise. And of course, Lady Q is now on the bridge, on some baseball bleachers, decked out to watch the show with Baby Q, much to Captain Picard and Riker's chagrin. So, but anyway, they've got them surrounded, and there's nothing that they can do. Picard is kind of at his wit's end. He's had enough. And Q, I guess, has had enough as well, and is like, all right, fine, let me show you what the story is. So now, for the rest of the book, you have it flashing between Q telling Picard his story, or at least starting to tell the story, and then also Riker and the crew of the Enterprise trying to, stave off the Calamarain, trying to do something. So let's just stick to one storyline for now. Riker and the Calamarain. So, again, they've had them surrounded. They're not trying to fight back. They're trying to communicate. But they're kind of slowly draining their shields, slowly doing more damage to them. And eventually they do have to fight back. So they start to fight back. And again, Q, Lady Q, and Little Q are just kind of watching from the bleachers, eating their popcorn, enjoying the show, as the Enterprise is rocking and getting, struggling to get out of this. Eventually they're forced to just keep kind of pumping up the intensity of their phasers until they're able to burn their way out. When they do get out, they make a slim escape, but then are caught right away again and captured again. Luckily, Data has been working this whole time on a way that they can communicate with them, and they are able to finally reach out, communicate with them, to no avail. And basically, through the kind of jumbled communications they have, they're able to determine that the Calamarain now consider the Enterprise a threat, because of a chaos element aboard and because of what they're trying to do to the moat, which is what they call the Great Barrier. So, and then they say that the Enterprise has to be dissipated, and that's how that part of the story ends in this book. So you have a great cliffhanger right there. The Enterprise is trapped. Shields are dropping. They've been threatened with death. But the real, the real meat of the story is Q's backstory, which is what you get a little bit of here. So, and they really take you through. In the time of, in Q's time, I don't know, billions of years, something like that. But you start out by seeing a young Q who's hanging out inside of a sun, basically. And the older Q is taking Picard all along, showing him all these things. So Picard gets this amazing opportunity to see all these things that, of course, you could never see before. So anyway, you have young Q kind of playing around inside of a sun when he makes a little ribbon of energy, and he kind of spins it and he spins it and he spins it and he throws it out of the sun. And then older Q says, "I wonder what happened to that." And then in his mind, Picard's thinking about the Nexus ribbon, and was that the ribbon? He's going to ask Q about it, and then Q just kind of moves on to the next thing. So, but Q also, in addition to doing whatever he's doing in the sun, decides to go subatomic. This is young Q, mind you, and he starts playing with like the particles that make up the universe and quarks. And I wrote some of this stuff down. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But anyway, and he's breaking down and doing things that I guess maybe he's not supposed to be doing, because at this point he gets punished by the Continuum and has to spend something like 1,000 cycles like sitting there doing nothing. So then they cut forward a little bit after that, where they show he shows kind of like so much in this too, and there's so many like interesting little things that they're getting. The next sequence that Picard gets shown by Q is Q going to this ancient planet, which is by Picard's time, billions of years ancient. But now he's being shown this ancient planet and this ancient ritual that Q comes and watches every year, and he's watched it for, he watches it for like 1,000 years every year, where these people will fly down from the top of this mountain on these gliders, and then when they approach this large stadium with this big watery area or whatever, well, actually no, it's cliffs, these cliffs that are all made of jade, and then down in the water there's this area that has these torches in it, and they have to jump off of their gliders and land in the middle of the torched area, because if they land outside of it, they're eaten by these snakes. So like this whole big sequence, it's just so, I don't know, it's strange and compelling and weird, but just Q is like enraptured by it, and he watches it every year, and he actually brings a date there, which is his future wife, and they're kind of clashing there, and it's this kind of Q showing Picard all these things, these little aspects of his past, and like what's going on with him, and maybe why he struggles and why he became like who he is, so just very interesting stuff. Again, the cliff divers or whatever off of these jade cliffs then are also revealed to be the progenitor species, or maybe hinted at to be the progenitor species that seeded the galaxy with all the other species out there. So just so many fun little interesting things that they dive into there. So they go from that scene to another scene, and this is where the story really kind of this is where the meat of the story kind of goes, and you can kind of see where this is going to go and what we're going to be dealing with in the Q Zone, which is the next book. But anyway, Q goes to the Guardian of Forever, basically bored, I think, and asks to be shown something new, someplace he's never seen, something different, and kind of just randomly jumps through the portal and ends up on this frozen Arctic tundra world. He walks for a bit, where he comes upon this person, kind of dressed for the cold, wrapped up in rags, wrapped up in leather, larger than a normal person, sitting there playing a strange game of solitaire. And he introduces himself as Zero, and seems like kind of a nice fellow, and is looking for a way to get off of this place. So Q at first is a little, a little nervous about this guy. He doesn't quite know, but then he's kind of goaded into helping this O escape. And as Picard and Q are watching, there's so many little things that kind of show up and are in there that are like, whoa, this guy is not quite who he seems to be. So, but in the end, he kind of goads Q into helping him get into Q's realm. So they escape from the Arctic planet using the Guardian of Forever. Q has to physically pull this guy through the portal because the Guardian is freaking out, saying, warning, warning, warning. This thing is not allowed in this plane of existence. Q, of course, says, well, you don't tell me what to do. And then the book ends with Q and Zero being in our plane now, but then Q takes him to the Q Continuum, which, if you've seen, there's an episode where they show the Continuum as kind of like a dusty road in time, and it kind of is partially that, but then off in the distance you can see this gigantic superhighway with multiple exits, and it's described like an MC Escher superhighway, and that's kind of his description of what the Continuum looks like, So, very cool. But basically, Q convinces the gatekeeper there of the Continuum to let O and him onto the Continuum, and that he will vouch for him. And that is how the book ends, right there. So, what a cliffhanger. I need to see what happens next, because this O is up to no good. And he's going to do something quite terrible. And I'm thinking that he is definitely tied to the spider, probably is the spider, and somehow is trapped on the other side of the barrier, or something like that. So that's what we're going to find out very soon, tomorrow. We're going to get started tonight, and then tomorrow we are going to dig into that thing. Actually, let's grab it now so we can have a peek. The Q Zone by Greg Cox. The mystery of Q's past unfolds. Look, there's another creepy face right there. I don't know who that's supposed to be. Just Picard featured on the cover on that one. But, yeah, we are diving right into this thing. Let's see where we start with a nice prologue. Soon, he cackled. Sooner, soonest. There we go. We got the Seussian spider guy right there at the beginning. So this is going to be good. We're going to dive right into that. We're going to take a lot of fun notes. We're going to have a great time. And we'll be back to talk about it sooner rather than later. So, as always, everybody, thank you so much for listening to me talk about a Star Trek book for, 29 minutes or so. As always, live long and prosper. And we'll see everybody in the next one. Goodbye.